All right, I'll do the rundown one more time and then we'll get underway. Okay, so for those of you that have just joined, we'll kick off. We're just about to kick off. We'll ask you to just stay on mute throughout the session, just so that we don't get too much overlapping conversation or confusion going on. There's no need at this stage for you to have your camera on. Feel free to keep that turned off. Just so that you know, we are recording this session, and so we plan to publish it on YouTube or some other place at some stage, so you'll be able to watch it back down the track. And also, if you do have any questions that you want to raise either now or as we go through the session, please just jump into the chat, drop them in there. We'll be sure to leave enough time at the end of the session to answer them as best we can, or follow up with you afterwards as well. Okay, so the session today, what we're going to be running through is really covering off in a little bit more detail a lot of the stuff that we've been posting about on our blog in the last few days, and also stuff that we're in the process of developing and putting out there for both our members and the public as we all adjust to and start to run our businesses from a distributed team perspective or working from home. The first 3 points or areas that we're going to discuss are those on the screen there. So securing your access to things in your office, talking about scams and fake news, and also securing the systems that you're using to actually communicate both internally and externally. These are things that many businesses have already had to face into and or are probably facing into right at this minute. So we'll spend a little bit of time going through them in a little bit more detail, and they're definitely the areas that we've focused on in the first place. There's also, we'll touch on some other areas down the track towards the back part of this session. And so looking at what service disruptions might appear and how that could impact you, the equipment in your office and how to keep that safe now that you're not there as often, how to secure your teams and the people in your business when they're working from home, and to help to make sure that they stay cyber fit there as well as what to do with all the data that they're possibly downloading and storing there, and having to work with in a home environment too. So at the end of today, really we hope to make it possible for you to make an informed decision around some of the specific security challenges that might be popping up now or down the track with the sorts of things that you're having to put in place as you react and respond, and to make sure that you're prepared to address any of the risks that are coming in as a result of that. Ideally, over the coming months, as you catch your breath and as things try to get back to some sort of normalcy. Everything that we're covering today is detailed in our blog online, and we're updating this on a regular basis. So if you do want more detail, or you have any other questions, or you're looking for more answers, then please feel free to jump in and check out our blog at cinch.com.au/coronavirus, which you can see on the screen there. Just before we get going, a little bit about us, about Cinch. So we were founded late in 2018. Both Susie Jones, my co-founder and our CEO, and I started it after working for a number of years in large corporates. Specifically, my role is on the technology and the security side of things. So my position is formerly CTO. And really the experience and what we're bringing to the table for small businesses is really from our experience working in large corporates, most recently in Australia Post, and helping them with their cyber resilience initiatives. As a business and organisation, we're 100% focused on small and micro businesses. We're pretty unique, both in Australia and the world, actually, in that. Unfortunately, most of the security industry is geared more towards the top end of town, but it is great to see a lot of support coming from governments and non-profits currently as well. So we're certainly right behind all of that. Our goal is to try to help businesses avoid what can be one of the most devastating experiences in their professional life, which is responding to a cyber incident. It's obviously interesting to put that into perspective at the moment, but it's certainly something that we want to help businesses avoid moving forward as well. Instead of security, we tend to talk about cyber fitness. And when we're talking about cyber fitness, it's really about taking small incremental steps, 5 minutes at a time, that gradually will increase the security of your business and the preparedness that you're going into. We've built an entire platform and a service for business owners and people within small businesses to help to navigate that and to continue to stay on top of all of the risks and the threats and whatnot that are out there. We're reasonably new, so if you haven't heard of us before, that's not a surprise. But we're really proud to have around 165 businesses, actually more than that now, on our platform, and we're helping them both now, but also we'll be there as we carry forward and helping them to stay in business, hopefully long after everyone gets on top of COVID-19. So securing access, and this is probably the first thing that you as a business may have had to address and think about. As we've had to shift and move towards not really leaving our houses wherever possible and staying at home, every business, and this is every business from the top end of town all the way down to people who are already working from home, essentially, are really having to adjust to and figure out how to continue to operate when they can't get into the office and access all the usual technologies that they're comfortable and familiar with using. And we've heard of large businesses moving to shift work arrangements and a whole bunch of other sort of working arrangements just to navigate the constraints that are there within their security or within their technology, sorry. For those of us that are lucky enough to all be working from laptops, be 100% cloud-based and everything, this switch to everyone working from home was relatively painless and straightforward. But the vast majority of businesses that we work with, and the small businesses in particular, there will be something that's left behind in the office that ultimately still needs to be accessible to the rest of the team so that they can continue to operate and stay productive. Making that sort of stuff available remotely, the first step that you need to go through is actually to figure out what it is that you've got that is there in the office and really take note of that so that you can then take the next step and figure out whether or not and how you're actually going to make it remotely available. We put together an exercise on our blog that you can check out if you're interested or still going through the process of figuring out what you have to really help guide you through that. But then once you get to the point where you've identified what it is that you need to make available remotely, really the next trick and the hard part is then to figure out how to do that. So we sort of largely talk about 5 different techniques or solutions that you can think about deploying that will help you gain access to something that might be stuck within your business or within your office, sorry, and not available remotely. I'm just going to run through them quickly, but in essence, there's some of those are a lot easier to secure, and there are other ones that are a little bit more difficult to secure, and you should really be thinking about, and if you have introduced or had to implement them, looking at ways of reducing the risk that that's introduced into your business. So the first option really is to essentially do without something. So if you can do without your office printers, then it's really simple to keep them secure when from anyone outside of your business. They just don't get exposed externally, and so you don't need to think too much about what you need to do to secure that type of approach. Anything else that you might be able to do without as a business, it's always going to be easier for you to essentially just set it to the side whilst we deal with what we're dealing with, and therefore not have to think too hard about what you're going to do to secure it. For most businesses, obviously, that's not going to really work particularly well. So you're going to need to think about and look at some of these other options that you can see on the screen. The easiest one really from a security perspective, or the most appropriate from a security perspective, would be to move to some sort of a cloud alternative. So moving to away from your online file, your network file share, and moving to something up in the cloud like Office 365 or G Suite. That's a good example of being able to pick something up which is usually stuck in your office and not accessible externally, and move it into a cloud solution that can be accessed from anywhere, basically. the good thing from a security perspective about those types of solutions is that they come baked in with a whole bunch of different security features, and you will have access to a bunch of stuff that you can do to lock those down. The challenge with those is trying to figure out what those features are and often how to actually go about turning them on, but at least you have that as an option. If you do have to provide access to something that is physically stuck in your office, there are really three other ways that you can approach that. The best way that we would recommend you looking at would be to leverage an Office VPN. So this is unfortunately usually means that you would have to have some hardware or something installed and implemented in your office before you try to get access to it remotely and into your network. And it's a little bit of an undertaking to get it in there. But if you do have access to that, it's certainly worthwhile to look at ways of extending that and leveraging that wherever possible. The key things to think about when you're looking at a VPN are really to make sure that it's been updated and patched recently. There's a lot of vulnerabilities with these types of solutions that have been popping up in recent months, and it's important to make sure that your business is protected from those types of things. And you should also look for ways to restrict who can access it and where they can access it from, but also once they're connected, what they can access from that. Just to be clear as well, when we're talking about an Office VPN, it's a little bit different to what you might use to protect yourself when you're connecting through public Wi-Fi at a cafe or an airport. That will give you some privacy around what you're connecting on, but it's not going to give you access to what's in your office. So again, this is a good solution if you already have something in place to be able to expose the connections and the technologies in your office out to the broader world. If you don't already have something like that in place, a lot of businesses are exploring and looking at essentially giving remote access to the desktops or to the other servers and things that are running in their office already. So essentially leaving your computer on at the office, going home, and then connecting into it from whatever computer you can get access to on whatever internet connection. That's again an effective way of doing it, but ultimately there's a lot of vulnerabilities and challenges around securing that, and you really want to make sure that you've taken steps and worked with your IT service provider to make sure that that's been locked down. The remote desktop of those things is also pretty commonly attacked by cyber criminals and attackers. So again, take a particular care when actually using those types of solutions. The last thing that you could do as well is if you do have a web-based solution that's running out of your office, you could potentially just publish that on the internet and make that available. There are security controls and steps and measures that you can wrap around those types of things. And it's definitely worthwhile talking and making sure that they've been put in place before you do that, because web-based systems are the most commonly attacked and easily discovered services out there as well. One thing we would strongly encourage you to do, no matter what what approach you take, if you're having to go down this road, is to make sure that you've got multi-factor authentication in place. I'll be banging on that drum a little bit today. And it's a really important one. And really the key thing there is to make sure that if someone does discover your password, or if one of your team unfortunately reuses a password or it does get compromised, at least there's a little bit of extra control in place to limit that service or that technology from being accessed now that it's essentially available anywhere in the world. So many of you are probably, if you're going down this road, working with your IT support teams. If you do encounter issues or you are concerned or you would like a little bit more information about this, we'd be happy to have a chat with your IT support provider, or if you flick us an email through hello@cinch.com.au, we'd be happy to get back to you with some of our thoughts on the approach that you've had to take, which inevitably is really important. And the first thing that we would encourage you to do is to make sure that you can continue to operate your business. So certainly go down these roads if necessary. Just go down there with a bit of mindfulness around the security implications. The next thing we want to cover off today is around the scams and the fake news that's starting to pop up. And many of you are probably already seeing this and getting quite familiar with the sorts of stuff flying around on social media and coming into your inbox. Really, it's quite sad, but cyber criminals will look for these types of situations to help them and really harm others that are out there. what they're doing is playing on human emotion. And they're really taking advantage of a number of different emotions that are going on. So one of those being the anticipation that you have for information. Everyone's looking for news and expecting to hear from government organizations, other businesses that they work with, their customers, all sorts of people. And so they're really playing on that. And the fact that you're expecting and reacting quickly to things is they're going to tap into that and try to get you to click on something, run something, or do something that's really quite dangerous. The trust that you have with larger organizations, again, government departments and whatnot, is another thing that they will be looking to leverage. And so keep an eye out for scams and things that are attacking or taking advantage of well-known organizations and brands. Sadness and playing into our, our loss and our sense of sadness that's going on at the moment as we react and respond as well is another technique that criminals will be using. And they'll be setting up and encouraging you to donate to places that don't actually exist. And so really keeping an eye out and being aware of that is an important thing to be mindful of. And probably the biggest one at the moment is really the fear that's going around. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of division that's being driven out into the community as a result. And so be careful of the sorts of things that you're reading and sharing just generally online. And that's, I mean, generally good advice anyway. Specifically for small businesses, some things to be aware for and some scams that we're seeing and we have seen in recent days that are quite specific and things that are likely to hit a small business in particular. So one of them that's popped up is many of us are probably looking at how can we get tested, particularly if we've got teams. How can we make it available and possible for our teams to understand whether or not they have COVID-19? So there are sites and scams out there selling, boxes of test kits and things so that you can get your team tested or your family tested. Many of these are just simply not legitimate, and they're really just looking to scam you and get credit card details and or to get you to run or do something inappropriate or harmful. We're all scrambling at the moment to just try to get access to equipment, so laptops, remote working equipment, headphones, cameras, all sorts of bits and pieces. These types of things, if you're out there and you're searching and you're getting desperate, you might run into sites that are essentially set up to try to collect your bank account details or your credit card details and suggest that they're selling you something at an amazingly good price, but ultimately they're probably, if it's too good to be true, it's really is too good to be true if that's the deal that they're offering. There's a lot of different incentives coming out through the government and other organisations, and so again, criminals are starting to tap into that and use that to their advantage by essentially putting out fake sites or sending messages encouraging you with details on how to get access to relief funding and other things. We saw this first in the UK, and we're following the UK in many ways, and this is one of them. And so keep an eye out and really make sure that you're going through sites like oz.gov.au and other verified sources to get information about this, as opposed to just running into random websites and searching around and or clicking on and responding to emails as they pop up. We're also starting to see, and this is really in recent days, scams attacking particularly remote workers. So again, we're all going out there, we're telling people about how to connect into these new VPN services we're setting up and sign up for all of these new services. These are different things that people are leveraging to their advantage as they go out and scam. So make sure that your staff are aware and on the lookout for these types of things, as well as potentially your clients and customers if you do see something. From a personal perspective, if you are looking for information on the sorts of scams that are going out there and what to watch out for, Stay Smart Online has a really good resource. And if you sign up for their alerts, they'll let you know when they do discover or hear about specifically broad targeted things. So certainly sign up and check that one out. And then if you do encounter anything suspicious as a small business, or that you think small businesses should or might need to be aware of, please feel free to forward them or drop us an email at coronavirus@cinch.com.au. We're really keeping our eye out for these types of things, and where it is something urgent or something that could be quite harmful, we will be sending out notifications to both our members and potentially people who've subscribed to notifications through our website. Excuse me. So we're all sort of switching over to this style of communication. Many businesses traditionally would be quite familiar with face-to-face or in-person business activities, and we're all scrambling really to figure out, how do we do this online from our bedrooms? How do we continue to operate? At the start of the year, since we're looking at running this type of session in person to rooms or of people, if you had told me in January that come the end of March, I'd be speaking to dozens of businesses from the comfort of my bedroom, that would not be something that I would have expected. But here we are. And so we're all really scrambling to adopt things like Google Hangouts and Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack for internal communications, WhatsApp, essentially anything that we can get our hands on that allows us to connect and communicate and continue to work with other people. Just as it is with every new technology we introduce into our business, though, and many of these are new technologies for businesses, there's risks that come with that. In particular, the risks are quite high if you're doing sensitive types of business activities. So in particular, if you're providing legal advice over Zoom, or if you're going through and giving mental health support, or running children's gym sessions or dance lessons, all sorts of various things that people would expect to be confidential or sensitive, or think about as sensitive. There's really risks associated with that being undermined and the trust being lost around there. So we have a number of different things that we would encourage you to think about when you are starting to use these types of technologies. So first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, so multi-factor authentication really is one of the best things that you can do. So making sure that people can't actually get in and compromise your account, and therefore act and communicate on your behalf in these services, is quite fundamental and important. If you don't have a need to make something or available or to communicate externally with a service, try wherever you can to just limit the exposure of that, and limit those types of ability to access that. So if you're using Zoom internally, make sure that that's only available internally. Similar with Hangouts like we're using today, or any of those other technologies, is try to limit external use if it's primarily being used for internal use. If you do need to, or you are sharing links to meetings or invitations to meetings, or codes to log into certain rooms or meetings, try to limit where you're sending that out to, and who has access to those types of things. The more that you share those types of things out there, the more likely it is that you'll get someone attempting to or actually joining that you didn't really want to. Think about as well where you're connecting from. So if you're coming in from a public location, or your kids are running around and you're trying to do something sensitive, again, that could be a bit of a problem for confidentiality. So try to think about your surroundings and make sure and try to find a private location. It is really challenging to do at the moment, but it is an important step if confidentiality is critical to what you're doing. Control who can join, and you would have seen, we're sort of limiting who can join and controlling that into this session. Who can jump in and out of sessions. Zoom bombing is a new thing that's popping up as a result, where people are just randomly jumping into public meetings. Not the most ideal thing for you and your customers or clients, or even your internal team meetings. So have a policy on recording. I mentioned up front that we are recording this session. So if you are having meetings on these platforms, just be mindful and be open with people about those, whatever you're doing when it comes to recording, and ensure that they're informed and consenting to that if it is sensitive in particular. And lastly, look for where logs are stored. So knowing where those recordings are kept, knowing what logs there are around who's talking to who and who's connecting and where that's happening can really get you out of a jam if down the track something does pop up and cause issues. As you make these changes, it's also really important to make sure that you're clear and you're communicating that out, changes around how you're communicating in and amongst anyone that's impacted on that. The really goal here is to make sure that people can continue to verify that you are who you are and that you're a legitimate person to be talking to, and also to identify those people who are trying to impersonate you or communicate as you when you haven't sanctioned that. So really important to make sure that you're clear and open about how you are going to communicate going forward. One area in particular that you should be focusing on is if you do any verification of messages. A lot of businesses, particularly those that are working in large financial transactions, will have steps and processes in place to contact, usually over the phone, to verify in person that something is legitimate and a request is accurate. So thinking about how you're going to continue to do that when no one can get to their office phone, either your business or their business can get to their office phones, is really important, and start to think about that if you haven't already. Excuse me. We're all starting to see disruptions popping up, and so planning for that is important and something that you should be thinking about if you haven't already. So both Zoom and Teams have had issues in the last couple of weeks as demand has increased. And Telstra's also run into a few problems, and likely a lot of the telcos are already doing that, and they're struggling with kids streaming on Netflix and adults trying to do work and everything else that's going on. It's just overloading all sorts of networks and whatnot. Similarly with just the massive increase of people accessing remote video conferencing services and whatnot. The government's also running into problems. So Centrelink services have been attacked by cyber criminals one day, but then realizing that ultimately it's just massive demand for these services was taking it down. Essentially, what it will happen is, and what we encourage you to do is to essentially expect that this sort of stuff is going to happen, continue to happen, and things will disappear. So unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about that. But what you can do is plan for that. And probably the most important thing you can do in planning for that is to make sure that you have some backup options. So whilst we're using Google Hangouts today, we could switch over to Zoom if that was having problems. If you're using mobile, if you're using internet at home and there's a problem with Telstra or the NBN, having a mobile-based phone backup is also important and should be something that you should be preparing for. It's also important to think about what you've left behind. So if you have left behind some things in the office, keep in mind that those things are there in a physical location, and ultimately someone may actually attempt to get access to them whilst knowing that you're not there. So putting a notice on your door, essentially telling everyone that you're not going to be there for a few weeks, is possibly not the best thing to be doing, and really something that you should be careful about doing as well. So if you aren't going to be in your office and you do want to leave a note there for anyone that does pop up, instead of sort of letting them know when you're likely to come back and why you're not there, potentially just let them know that how to contact you so that they can get a little bit more information about it as well. Also think about and double check the physical security, making sure that that your office is actually locked down and people can't just really get into that. Try to make it difficult for people who might find themselves with a little bit of extra time and a bit bored at the moment. Don't make it enticing for them to drop in and pick up and take off with a server or some other bit of data that might be hanging around. If you're not going to be there for a while, feel free. We actually encourage you to think about. If you're not going to be there for a while, we'd actually encourage you to consider unpublishing your physical address on Google, social media, or any other business directories where it might be listed. That way, again, it'll make it a little bit harder for someone to locate your office if for some reason they're uncomfortable with, or if for some reason they discover that you're actually not going to be there. If possible, and you aren't particularly comfortable with the security of your office, you might want to think about moving particularly sensitive physical devices or backup storage that might be kicking around to a more secure location. If you feel that because you're going to be home, it's safer for things to be at your home, that could be one option. If you do have a secure storage location, that could be another option. Again, it's really just about making sure that the stuff that is in your office, if it is left there for an extended period of time unattended, is actually looked after and isn't going to be compromised as well. Probably the biggest thing that we're all starting to grapple with, if we haven't already, is facing into everyone really connecting from whatever device they have access to at home. If you've been able to send equipment home, that's great. Just know that eventually it's probably going to degrade in its security if you're not maintaining it from your office. But it's also equally likely, if not more likely, that you're also needing to encourage your team or your staff to log in from whatever device they can get their hands on, possibly the stuff that they've got at home that they use for everything else. Some of the stuff that you should start to think about asking your staff to check, just so that you have a little bit more confidence in the security of what they're using, are those things on the screen there. So look for and make sure that updates are being installed, ideally automatically. Check their web browser security. If they can use a separate web browser for work versus their personal stuff, that's great. Encourage them to install things like ad blockers, really limit the dangers online. Make sure that they're running antivirus, again, that it's up to date. Ideally, they can operate and use their computer without having administrative privileges, which limits the chances of something malicious getting installed and causing harm. Look for ways of putting encryption in place so that if someone does take the device or it does disappear, that the chances of the data that was on it being accessible are quite low. A lot of the modern devices also now have firewalls built in that are quite robust, so encourage them to check and turn those on. And lastly, ensure that they've got strong passwords, ideally a face or fingerprint set up to secure it, and limit the ability for other people within the house or around to actually access and share those things. The fact that people are also connecting from their home networks also exposes and introduces a few different risks as well. And it's important to think about not just the network itself, but all of the other things that are connected to the network, all the smart devices and the gaming consoles and the tablets that the kids are using, essentially everything that's in there that could potentially introduce a risk to their devices and the data and the work ultimately that you're encouraging them to do from there. So again, much like the devices that they're connecting to, it's important to look at a whole bunch of different things and ask them to check this stuff. So making sure that they're up to date and patched, particularly on their router, to make sure that that's been patched. Encryption and making sure that they're connecting, if they're using Wi-Fi, with something called WPA2 or WPA3, and making sure that those connections are secure and they're only being connected to from things that are trusted. Making sure, again, that the firewall was enabled. It is uncommon for that to be disabled, but it's important to check that. Default passwords are inherently quite insecure, so ensuring that the default passwords are being changed and are strong is an important step too. And lastly, there are ways that they can use potentially a guest network setup to isolate things that really just need an internet connection, like smart TVs and Google Home devices, away from everything else. And encouraging them to look at and try to set that up is another useful way for them to actually come in, for them to connect and isolate and separate the stuff that they're using for work from the stuff that really doesn't need to be connected to the same network. We will be sharing more information about this specifically in the next week or so. So if you haven't already, please consider checking out our website and subscribing to updates on this particular thing at cinch.com.au/coronavirus. One last little area, and then we'll get into questions, is really securing the data at home. So really, a lot of us are encouraging people to work from home, and essentially that's going to introduce and require people to have access to our data and our stuff in their homes. And so if there is particularly anything sensitive that's going there, it's really important to keep in mind and look at the steps and the measures and control that wherever you can. If you haven't already, stop and have a think about the classification of the information that you have in your business. So really focus in on what types of documents and information are likely to be accessed by your team at home. And in particular, is there anything in there that's sensitive that may need some extra protections to be in place? Also keep in mind physical copies. So if people are going to be printing things, keep in mind and be clear about what you expect them to do with those physical copies. So having the kids write on the back of them and then just throwing them in the general rubbish with a whole bunch of confidential information on it, really not a great idea and something that you should be looking out for. Give your team, if possible, secure repositories that they can put this type of information into. So if you have OneDrive or SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, if you've set that up and you've put the right security controls in place, they're great places where everyone can sort of come together and use, that you can have confidence and that you can be, have a little bit more control over people accessing that stuff. Just make sure that everyone who's using that does have their own account. It's a really important way for you to make sure and be clear who is accessing what at any point in time, and that the people who should have access do have access and not just everyone having access to everything. Share details on how the data that they're using and what they're accessing at home should be protected. So ideally give them a cloud backup solution that they can use to back it up so that it's not stuck in their house and that you ultimately have control over it and can get to that down the track if you need to. Discourage them having and keeping local copies if you can. It's important for them to have local copies in case, it may be important for them to do that if they don't have a cloud alternative, just to make sure that it will continue to be there if it does disappear or if the device does get destroyed or damaged. But ideally, you'd want to try to discourage that and have it stored centrally. And if it is stored locally and downloaded locally, make sure, again, that encryption is applied and wrapped up around that so that if it does go on walkabout, that there is some controls and you can have some confidence that it's not getting into the wrong hands. Make sure, as I said, that everyone's using their own accounts, and also make sure that you can keep track of access. So look at turning on auditing if it's not available already. Check and review logs of those audits if you can. Semi-regularly to make sure and keep track of who is downloading and sharing and doing what with what. Ideally, the goal here is to ensure that you're prepared and that you can reconcile all that back into your business when ultimately we all have the ability to return back to our office. There will be a process and a stage at some stage where we all need to start pulling everything back in, and having a good record of where everything went is going to be the first step and the first thing you're going to have to think about there. Also start to think about, when you get to that point, and or earlier if it's necessary, how are you going to encourage and or instruct people to securely delete anything that they've had to actually download and use at home? So that's really, we've covered most of the main points that we wanted to cover in this session. We'll open up for questions in a minute. Just before we get there, just keep in mind, both myself and the Cinch team, most of us are on the call. We're here to help, and we can help you in a whole bunch of different ways, and you can get a hold of us in many different ways. If you haven't already, we do have what we call a cyber fitness platform, and you can access that for free on our website, so cinch.com.au. You can get in, it'll give you a bit of a sense of the types of things you should be looking at. You'll also get alerts and notifications on anything new that's popping up and or any specifically for small businesses threats that are appearing. Again, as I said at the start, all the information that we've covered here is discussed in more detail, and we're continuing to contribute on our website at cinch.com.au/coronavirus. Share that around as you see fit. You can subscribe to that as well, and we'll notify you when we do make an update to that specifically. You've joined us through if you've joined us through Eventbrite, you can follow us there, and we'll notify you with any new webinars that do pop up down the track. And we do plan to run more, not just about this, but just generally around cyber fitness and small business. And lastly, you can follow us on social media. So at CinchSec is what we use everywhere. So you can follow us there. Again, we're announcing updates to the blog and whatnot and other events coming up down the track. So that is really the end of the session, and we'll switch over now to a bit of Q&A. So firstly, I'm just going to jump over and have a quick look at the questions that have been popping up. So thanks to the team tracking all of that. Looks like it's pretty quiet at the moment. Just bear with me 1 second. So yeah, just feel free to drop any questions into the chat and we'll get onto them as they come in. Digital signing tools. Thanks for the question, Rachel. So scams on digital signing tools. Not specifically, not any more than normal. Really, those sorts of tools are getting scammed anyway. They are used and used in scams quite commonly. They're pretty well known. I guess what you get alluding to there is with the increase in people using them, it is probably more likely that scammers will start to use them to try to run scams. I definitely keep an eye out for that. But we haven't seen anything, I specifically haven't seen anything pop up any more than usual. I think most of the scams that are going out there at the moment are really targeting the specific stuff around communication. So VPN solutions, communication solutions, the act of signing and doing those types of things. Having to move to these solutions is likely to incur it. I'd recommend just encouraging people to keep an eye out for that. And certainly if you are seeing anything, then please feel free to let us know and we can dig into that and or spread the word that those are happening. But short answer is not yet. Any other questions? Yeah, drop something into the chat. Here we go, Marcus. Some stuff using VPN from home related to their VPN. Yeah, and this is so Marcus, your questions around people running into issues connecting over VPN, typically due to the setup of their home network and their home internet connection. That's definitely the case. And it's certainly something that is going to be a struggle for many of us as we just navigate through that. It's obviously not a good time to try to encourage someone to switch service providers or to do things. So the fact that you're getting access via mobile data is great and a good start. I think it's great that Telstra and I'm guessing Optus as well have increased and given a bunch of data out to people. But yeah, looking at ways of ensuring that the rest of your team have solid, reliable network connection is a real task. So it's not something that we specifically support or give a guidance around about how to do that. Certainly, if you are reliant on the VPN, you will need to explore that and ways looking into how you might be able to get mobile connection out to everyone would be a good start. And then also possibly looking at other ways that you could expose things from your office externally if you need to, potentially moving it to a cloud service or coming up with an alternative way for people to connect might be a worthwhile exercise if you're having a lot of trouble getting people to connect to it from their home network connections. Certainly work with your IT provider on that one, and if you have one. Yeah, unfortunately, you're going to be navigating a whole bunch of different ISPs around that stuff. Providing more details to do some of the things you explained. Yeah, so certainly that we covered a stack of stuff here. There's potentially weeks worth of work there for most businesses. So there's a couple of things. So definitely we go into more detail on how to do a lot of what we've just covered really quickly here today on our website. So cinch.com.au/coronavirus. If you're looking for that, we are breaking these things down into more detail. Some of that we are making freely available. Some of that we would encourage you and you would need to sign up to our platform to get access to. So our platform is designed to give very specific detailed guidance around not just all of these steps, but essentially any security steps that we recommend. So we break these down and we get quite tailored on that. So as an example, for all of the stuff that we talked about checking and configuring within the communications platforms like Zoom that you might be using, we're adding guidelines and specific step-by-step instruction on how to do that into our platform. So certainly check that out. You would need to be a paid member to get access to some of those, but it is very affordable and designed for small and micro businesses there as well. If you're running into particular things or you think you would like a little bit more detail, feel free to reach out to us at hello@cinch.com.au as well. And if we can, we'll share it. If not, we'll point you in the right direction for where to start looking. I guess just while we're waiting for questions, is anyone encountering any major hurdles or anything else that we haven't covered in this session as well? We're always really keen to hear about challenges that people are facing in this space and look for ways to help. So perhaps you've encountered something that you've addressed, or you do have a question about something. You're always welcome to contact us. Just flick back to the previous page. So you can get a hold of us on our website or reach out to us. We're very imminently available. So yeah, please feel free to reach out if there are any questions following up. We'll be making available some of these slides and whatnot through email. We'll follow up through email after this session. And as I said, we've recorded it so that we can share that online later as well, so you'll be able to play that back. Board reporting, fantastic question, Ariane. Thank you. So board reporting's tough, particularly for small businesses. There's the easiest way is to sign up for a Cinch membership. So we do have some capabilities in our platform to allow you to readily generate reports that can really start a conversation, and to have that conversation at a board level. So certainly check that out and reach out if that's something that you're interested in addressing. And talking about cybersecurity with the board. Really, the first thing the most difficult thing to do with any sort of management and in a board conversation is really focusing the conversation around the key risks and the really material threats that are out there. And so going through an exercise of actually having the risk in your business assessed and then articulating that at the right level and talking about both what you've done and what you should or could be doing to address those risks is really the key thing that you should be talking about with your board. It is unfortunately a difficult space to wade into. In larger organizations, there's whole teams of people that do this on their behalf. We've, again, designed our platform to help you do that. So we're always talking about the biggest risks and the biggest threats to your business and helping you go through that. So definitely check out our platform. Other than that, it's really difficult for smaller organizations or nonprofits to actually go through that. So you're going to be talking to probably industry consultants and whatnot, which are going to be quite expensive. But if you did have a challenge around that or some specific requirements around reporting to the board on your cyber risk, again, feel free to reach out and we can help you with that. Any other questions? I think we're getting quite there. If people are on the phone, I think we've put everyone on mute, so it might be a little bit challenging you to get off mute. Can look into how to do that. But yeah, if you did want to get off mute and ask a question as opposed to typing, then feel free to do that now. You'll have to unmute yourself though. Sorry, I can't do that for you. Otherwise, we might wrap it up in a second. And yeah, so feel free to reach out. As I said, follow the blog. So there's a lot that we're putting out. We have a lot more in flight. Things are shifting quite constantly, so it's important to stay informed around these things, and certainly we're doing our best to keep people up to date. So yeah, reach out if you have any questions or you encounter anything. And other than that, thank you so much for joining. Feel free to share, and yeah, we'll speak to you again when you have any questions and whenever you would like. But thank you very much. Have a great day.